Hello and welcome to UFPTC. I'm NapalmF. Today we're going to be talking about networking basics. So first off, let's talk a bit about what is networking. Networking is the idea that computers and other devices will be able to talk to each other, even though they might not be in the same room. They might even be in a different state. Basically, the internet is just one giant network. So I won't go super in depth into it. I'm sure almost all of you know this. If you don't, just take some basic computing courses because this is going to be way too advanced for you. So first off, let's talk about how Linux actually names its network devices, because it's a little bit weird, different than Windows. Windows actually uses the real name of the device, which can be really, really frustrating because sometimes these can be really, really long, like Intel Ethernet 10100 megabit adapter or something like that. No one wants to type that. So, first off is that Linux actually names it in ways that can be a bit cryptic at first, but once you get it down, you will be so much happier. So, to view all the all the devices we have, type in ifconfig. It stands for interface configuration, and we'll see. I have two right now: ETH0 and low. So first we'll talk about ETH0. ETH0 is an Ethernet port. What this means is, that's your connected to wired network device. And Linux likes to name their devices starting at 0 to 1. So if you had two Ethernet adapters, you'd have it would show ETH0 and ETH1. If you had three, it'd be ETH0, ETH1, and ETH2. Now, the next one I want to talk about is the local loopback. Local loopback is a bit of a weird device to explain to newbies, but I will give it my best shot. It's what's called a local loopback. So if you look at it, it has the IP address 127.0.0.1, and that is a loopback IP, meaning that when you put in that IP, your computer intercepts it before it even goes to the router, and it says, "Oh, I'm just going to loop this back and act as if I'm being accessed from the outside by myself." So, for instance, let's say you were running an HTTP server on port 80 on your local device. You would on that device type in 127.0.0.1, and that would loop back. Low is basically a loopback interface. That's all it really is. Another one I want you guys to know about is WLAN. I don't have a wireless device actually attached to this one because it's a VM, and my wireless device is actually being already used for my internet, so I can't disconnect it and connect it to my VM without the world exploding. So, it basically looks like this: WLAN 0. That's how it would be typed out. And WLAN is just the wireless network devices. The other one you want to know is BR. BR0, basically what that is that's our bridge. So you won't really see too much of this kicking around because we'll talk about it a bit and we'll use it later in some of the wireless attacks because we need to bridge devices. But for right now, don't worry your pretty little head about it. It's kind of a weird concept. So next, let's talk about ifconfig. ifconfig basically tells us stuff about our device and lets us configure those devices. So for instance, when we type it in, we get a list of things about it. So like ETH0 says that that's an Ethernet connection. Here's the MAC address. Here's the IP address. Here's the broadcast for the network, the mask, IPv6, everything you need to know. Now, what's cool about ifconfig is we can also set special things about our device. So, for instance, I can change the IP of my device by going, ifconfig ETH0 192.168.1. We'll change it to 110. And we'll see that our device has been changed. We'll be using this in a bit to be actually set up our static IP addressing. So static IP addressing basically lets us, the attacker, or any person in general, pick their own IP address on the network. Now, this is useful if you need to be in the same place on the network every time. You always want to give yourself a static IP address. If you're doing like port forwarding, any stuff like that, you're going to want that. Beyond that, noise-wise, when you enter in a network, you don't want your computer being noticed by, like, the routers or logged by routers. And so you want to use your static IP to kind of get a quieter entrance in the network. We'll be talking about DHCP after this, after we set up a static IP address, and we'll get a little bit more into noise levels around then. So the commands to set up your static IP is super, super simple. So first, you will want to give yourself a static IP address here. So you say 192.168.1.10 or 110, and that gives us that static IP address. Next, we need to add a route to the gateway. So we need to tell the computer where the gateway router is. So we do route add default GW 192.168.1.1. Now this changes depending on what subnet you're on the network, but for most networks it's going to be this. Next, we say echo name server 192.168.1.1 into /etc/resolve.conf. Now if I were to ping google.com, it should work hopefully, and there we go. So we're getting pings back from google.com. So now that that's all set up, let's talk about IP addresses. So again, a lot of this might be a bit review for some people, and I apologize for that. But I have to cover everything. So IP addresses are a way for computers to communicate with each other. There's two types right now: IPv4 and IPv6. IPv4 is what we're going to be talking about a lot right now. IPv6 we'll talk about later. It's actually a standard I'm not super 100% familiar with, but it's an upcoming standard, so soon you'll be seeing IPv6s instead of IPv4s. So IPv4s are an addressing system that contains 4 octets. An octet is just one of these little numbers right here, separated by a dot. Now, an octet can be anywhere from 0 to 1 or to 255, which is exactly 1 byte. And I can't remember how many possibilities it contains off the top of my head, but it's 255 to the 4th power. So, cool little info for you today. So, for instance, valid IP address would be like this one. There's some IP addresses also that are considered internal and some that are considered external. Anything in this range is going to be an internal address, and anything in the 10 range is going to be an internal. 127 is your local loopback, and that's basically really all you can talk about IP addresses. Now, an IP address, for instance, couldn't be this, because it goes outside the range of acceptable addresses. So let's talk a bit about DHCP. DHCP is super useful when you're a user who just wants to get on the internet. You're not doing anything shady or being a pen tester or anything. You just want to get to the internet. And what that does is it automatically assigns you IP address. However, it is super noisy. So walking into a network, you will definitely get logged if you use DHCP to get an IP address. You have to actually be really proactive and figure out what's going on in the network before you go use DHCP and to make sure that you're not being logged anywhere. So that's just the why not. Now again, I talked about the security versus usability trade-off, meaning that there is a trade-off in having something being easy to use versus something being secure, and you're always going to have that. Sometimes it's less than others. Sometimes it's super easy to have a change security standards. But the more secure something is, chances are the harder it's going to be for someone to use. So let's actually give ourselves a DHCP address and get one from the router. So let's do ifconfig eth0 down. That takes our device down, and then up. So if I were to type in ifconfig right now, you'd see that eth0 disappeared, because it's not actually connected to anything. I took it down. Now if we go ifconfig eth0 up and type in ifconfig again, we'll see it came right back. But we don't have an IP address. So let's actually get one. So to do that, we're going to do if up eth0. Oh, I forgot. That's right. Well, So unfortunately, I just ran into a bit of a snag here. I have this network manager still running up here, and it just auto connects, unfortunately. So sorry about that. So now if I do an ifconfig, I'm not connected anymore. Okay, so if I do if up, oh, that's weird. Ignoring unknown interface. Ifconfig ETH0 up. Huh, that's really strange. It looks like Networking Manager took over this version of Backtrack, unfortunately, so I can't give myself an easy DHCP address. Now, for most of you who don't have the Network Manager installed, the only reason I ever installed it was just to be able to use VPNs easier, and as you can see, Network Manager can be a bit of a pain. So if you're on a laptop or you want to use a computer to bring around with you to penetrate networks, don't install Network Manager. That will be such a frustrating experience. You won't want to deal with it. So if up configures the device, if down, and the device name puts it down. Unfortunately, since Network Manager again took control of my device, it doesn't want to work properly. So I apologize for that. Next, let's talk about ports a bit. Ports are a way for your internet connection to be broken up into smaller internet connections. So basically, a port allows a program to bind to it and use that port. No one else can use that port when that program's using it, and it lets you break up your internet connection into smaller ones. So, for instance, port 80 is generally used for HTTP traffic. So as you can see, that's open because we're going to want to be able to use that. We're going to want to surf the web. There's some other ports here open. I'm not sure about what 633 and 733 are for, but 2.1 is used for FTP, if I'm not mistaken. No, yeah, that's FTP. So, some of these are open by default on Backtrack. Yours might look drastically different because I've, special custom screwed around with this system a bit. But ports are just something small to keep in mind. You won't have to know a super whole lot about them until later. We're actually going to be talking about a lot in the Netcat chapter. So, just stay tuned for that. That's going to be our next unit. So our next unit after this is we're going to talk about bash basics. And bash is our command line. So when you go to, when you go into the terminal, this guy right here, this is actually a bash shell, a born-again shell. And we'll be learning a lot about this, how commands work, how arguments work, and some cool special stuff we'll be talking about later. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos, and all subscriptions are appreciated. It helps us know what people like, what people don't like. Comments especially. If you have any suggestions where you want this course to go, we're still in the early phases, so don't be afraid to say, oh, I want a whole unit on wireless cracking, although we're definitely having one of those. But anything special, don't be afraid to drop us a PM or a comment. Thank you very much, and again, please subscribe.